Welcome back to the Record Collectors Club Conversations podcast, and welcome to the 2024 Year in Review series and the second part of this double bill where I talk about some of my favourite records of 2024. Part one is already available to listen to, and I chat about January to June's releases, but this episode focuses on the second half of the year, from July to December. So let's dive straight back into my favourite releases and pick up where we left off in the summer and the releases starting in the month of July. So let's kick off with July, and then we kick off with Kasabian, Happenings. It's a band really I find that's split opinion in the last sort of two or three records when I talk to anyone about them. And this year's album, Happenings, for me is really strong. A lot of folks seem to have gone off the band since Tom left after his misdemeanors, but I'm glad that Serge and the other band members have carried it on. And maybe the last record wasn't as strong as Happenings is, but yeah, they've come back with a bang this year. Although it's a very short record, it's only just over half an hour long. Some really great tracks on this album. It's inspired by kind of 60s psych music. It has a great flow to it. Tracks like Algorithms and probably my favorite, Coming Back to Me Good. It is a really good upbeat feel to what Kasabian usually put out and the stuff that they used to put out back in the day, you know, on some of their early records like Empire. A little bit of hint of disco and soul as well in this record, and that's kind of through the spine of the album. But to me, I said it's a really, really good, strong record from Serge and the rest of the band. So one I really, really enjoyed. The other record through July that I really that caught my ear was Jack White and his album No Name. Obviously, it came totally out of the blue for everybody. And that's kind of the way Jack likes to do things. He just likes to drop albums or drop singles on his Third Man Records label. And that was released in mid-July on the Third Man Records label. And it only really got a physical format release as well, which was interesting at first, because that's like the good old school days of just having to pick up a vinyl record or an album, but in the record shop or whatever, and not stream it. So, but that meant it was quite difficult to track down copies of the record as well. So I didn't manage to get a vinyl copy till back end of August. So, but yeah, it's a really strong record. It's his sixth solo studio record, and probably one of my favorites from his catalog. Again, it's heavily blues influenced, and that's the guitar kind of sound that Jack White knows and plays so well. And it kind of harks a little bit back to the White Stripes stuff, the early sort of White Stripes stuff for me. And at times I think it also sounds a little bit like a bit of a modern sort of Led Zeppelin as well to my ears. But yeah, just kind of talking about Jack White, as record collectors and part of the record community. Jack's such a favorite person to a lot of people in this kind of community. And as I said, by releasing the album on vinyl record only as a surprise release as well, it kind of adds to the fact that vinyl's now more popular than ever in this modern era. And it didn't seem like a gimmick either. It kind of threw back to what it meant to be a music fan, back waiting for your favorite artist and band to drop that record. So that was a welcome return for Jack White, and one that I really enjoyed. So into August then, and probably the big band of August was Fontaine's DC. They released their fourth studio record, Romance, and for me it's their best since their debut album, Doggerel. I mean, lead single Starbuster is probably my favorite track of the year, and one that I've just probably constantly played. I've played it in DJ sets quite a lot. And again, James Ford has been involved in this record, and the sound has slowly evolved throughout their records. I mean, like I said, Doggerel was such a brilliant debut, but it kind of fell off a little bit for me in the other two records since then. But as soon as they put this one back, and put this out, it's been brilliant. I mean, Grange Chatton's solo album last year was really, really good, and I think the band have kind of followed off the back of that a little bit. I think his songwriting has become much more stronger. He's become more confident, and everything is kind of tied together a little bit better since the last two records. The record got so much critical acclaim in music press, and I'm recording this just in early December, and I've already seen some big lists from music magazines and stuff of records of the year, and this is high up in those lists and number one in a couple of them as well. So, um, I mean, the singer Graham Chatton's kind of said he wanted the band to move away from their usual Irish themed inspiration to create a more of a futuristic sound. And he kind of said, I think he said in an interview that he wanted to kind of create something like a dystopian future or something along those lines. And one of the songs on the album is called In the Modern World. And he kind of compared that to writing a soundtrack to a city, which I think you can kind of hear that now once you kind of think about it and you listen to that track back. So, yeah, it's a really good record. And as I said, it'll feature probably on a lot of people's list of the year. It will be on mine, and they've got some big gigs lined up for 2025. They're headlining a festival up here in Newcastle. They're doing big gigs in London, in Cardiff, and Manchester. So I think they're going to be a hot band next year. And yeah, I think I hope we try and get to see them live at some point. So the next album I want to talk about in August is from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and that's Wild God. We all know how much of a legend Nick Cave is and the Bad Seeds band are, and after a little hiatus from sort of Nick Cave concentrating on solo efforts and other collaborations, he came back with Wild God this year, and what such an incredible record it is. It's the band's first record together since 2019's Ghosty, which was a huge favorite of mine. But Wild God, really is probably going to be my favorite, one of my favorites of the year. Let's say it doesn't seem to be the usual Nick Cave record. It's not as mellow as sort of some of his old ones. It's very brutal. It's very in your face. And Cave even said in an interview, "There's no fucking about with this record. When it hits, and it really does hit you." Just some of the other people that played on the record, obviously Warren Ellis, Nick Cave's Trusty Simon's on this record, but also Colin Greenwood from Radiohead plays the bass, and that's that kind of adds a slightly different edge to it. You can kind of sort of listen to it a little bit different. The sound of the bass is different on this one. Obviously, that's just the way Colin kind of plays, but yeah, it feels like a joyous record, which obviously Nick Cave isn't quite used to putting that stuff out. He is had a lot of hardship over the last few years with things that have happened in his personal life, and that's kind of influenced his writing and his songwriting. But this kind of record gives you a sense of optimism, and I think Nick's really good at getting that across in a lot of his records. There's loads of great songs on this album. Wild God's great, so I think this is a must-buy record for a lot of people. So yeah, go out and buy this if you get the chance. The next record I want to talk about for August is from it's a band that have been a recent discovery for me late this year, and that's a band called Wunderhorse. Their album's called Midas. So numerous people mentioned their name to me, and I've just never really had time to sit down and properly listen to them. But when I did, I sort of instantly fell in love with their sound. This album Midas is a follow-up to the 2022 debut record called Cub, and yeah, it's a really really upbeat kind of exciting record. It's really well crafted, and it's a full kind of band record this time. As I think lead singer, I think he's called Jacob Slater. He recorded the debut himself and added a little bit of extra track and backing kind of stuff on it afterwards. But this one's a full band record together. It's a really raucous record. It's got a really thrashy kind of sound to it, and even the slower tracks on this album are quite gritty, quite rough and ready. But yeah, it's again, it's another real gem of a record, I think, and a real good like sort of follow up to a debut from a new band that again I'm really glad I've discovered, and I'm really glad that people have kind of given the name out to me. So some of Slater's lyrics are really it's sort of intense and thought provoking, and 2 records into their kind of career, it's interesting to see how a third one is going to follow. And I think if they follow it up with an excellent third record, I think it'll cement their place on large festival stages and headline slots in the next sort of coming couple of years. So the last band I want to kind of talk about and an album released this year is in August, is from a band that have appeared on the podcast already, and that's Moonlight Parade and their album Strange Times. Moonlight Parade are so criminally underrated. They've had such a great set of records over the last few years, and this one's definitely no different. It's really, really probably their strongest for a while, I think, anyway. But don't get me wrong, all the records are excellent. As I said, the band appeared on the podcast a few weeks ago. We talked about the writing process and how they came to make this record. So go back and check that out. That was episode 4. And the end result is such a beautiful kind of atmospheric record. And as I said, I think it is some of the band's best work. Just a bit of a background on the band. They're a 5-piece band from the southeast of the UK. They're influenced by so many bands that I love, including Doves, New Order, Echo and the Bunnymen, the Smiths. So you kind of get an idea about what that kind of album, The Strange Times, is kind of waiting for you and what music awaits for you on there. So yeah, really well worth checking out Moonlight Parade and their album Strange Times. So September then, so it kind of really kicked music back into gear following the kind of the break of the summertime. Autumn's always a busy release schedule for music and new records, and this ended up being a really busy month for releases. So let's start with the first, and that's David Gilmour and his new record, Looking Strange. This is his 5th studio record. He put it out in early September on Sony, produced by Gilmour and Charlie Andrew. This is a total departure from any sort of Pink Floyd kind of sound that we might be used to hearing Gilmour produce. And I think I read that Charlie Andrew, who helped produce it, kind of purposely asked or kind of pushed Gilmour to kind of get away from the Pink Floyd sound to expand music a little bit more. And, you know, it really did sound totally different to any kind of Pink Floyd stuff. His wife Polly's on lyric duties quite a lot on this one. And she said in an interview she addressed the aging process and theme of mortality. And I think the title Looking Strange also features keyboards from former Pink Floyd member Richard Wright, which was recorded before his death in 2008, which is absolutely incredible that they kept that piece of music and they've managed to fit it into a song and write some stuff around it. So Gilmour recorded this album over 5 months, both at his home studio and also at Mark Knopfler's studio in London. And on the whole, it feels like a reflective piece of music. It does have a kind of bluesy, kind of spiny tone running through it. And it can be quite dark and haunting. But yeah, I think Gilmour's kind of music has always kind of felt a little bit like that, like following on from Pink Floyd. You know, it's just very much similar to some of his last records, On an Island and Rattle That Lock, I absolutely loved. And this record also has that kind of element of improvisation to it, where he kind of just goes off and does sort of a solo jam or, you know, kind of does that kind of stuff. So, and I feel like, you know, this kind of follows up a little bit of a trio from those other 2 records that I mentioned, On an Island and Rattle That Lock, and this is kind of completes the trio, this album, Looking Strange. So it's be interesting to see what kind of different direction Gilmour might go off in next with his next record if he does another one. So yeah, so that's David Gilmour. So the next album probably caught a lot of people maybe by surprise, and it certainly did for me. And this was the return of Snow Patrol and their album The Forest is a Path. Probably the most surprising release of 2024 for me. And, you know, I absolutely loved this record. I've always been a Snow Patrol fan. And again, the last few years, I kind of lost touch with them a little bit. I was a huge fan of their early records. And, you know, obviously they went cataclysmic with the big hit, the Chasing Cars, back on off the second album. And then, yeah, maybe they fell out a little bit, but what an incredible return to form this has been. The opening track, All, is like a proper anthemic kind of track. It opens the album quite optimistically and a kind of bravado. And Gary Lightbody's songwriting feels to be at its best since penning kind of those songs I've talked about, you know, like Chasing Cars, Run, those kind of early Snow Patrol songs. And this was a really, really great kind of album opener. It does feel a little bit more grander than previous Snow Patrol records, I think, this album. And a lot of time has been given to production and kind of the underlining theme of the record. But yeah, it's typical Snow Patrol. It's very balladry, you know. Gary Lightbody's a great songwriter, and he gets that kind of down to a T on this album, no question about that. I think my favorite track on this record is called Talking About Hope, which is absolutely beautiful. It's a really heartbreaking song about reconciliation and, you know, heartbreak. And I think it's probably going to be one of my favorite ever Snow Patrol songs. But as I said, this was a brilliant surprise how good this album actually was. And when I first listened to the album, I went straight out and bought it. And it sounds so much better on a turntable as well. So I think if you like Snow Patrol from back in the day, I'd give them a chance again, and you won't be disappointed. The final album from September that I want to chat about is Maximo Park's Stream of Life. Obviously, big fan favorites up here in the Northeast, Maximo Park. They came back this year, and they've had a loyal fan base for over 20 years, and this is their eighth studio record, and it just still sounds so youthful, and just the band have aged so well, but you can just kind of still feel that playfulness and hear that playfulness on this record. It's not like the band are reflecting or anything on this record. You can feel a bit of introspection, but it's not like looking back. It feels like a bit of a hat tip to their early work, but it's still punchy, fast pace. They run through this record really, really well, and there's also a little bit of acoustic stuff in there. But this is Maximo Park at their kind of classic best. Paul Smith's songwriting is just so rich. Every time I listen to some of his stuff, even with it being collaborations with other bands or his stuff on Maximo Park, it's really, really good. There's still that youthfulness to his songwriting. The opening track, Your Own Worst Enemy, is kicks off the record quite strongly, and it's got that indie rock energy, and that's what we've come to love from this Northeast band, and that sets the tone for the record. Again, it's another must buy for me in 2024, and one that I really, really enjoyed. So just talking about a couple more records just to round up the month of September that I also enjoyed. The return of The and the record Installment, that just sounds like their usual 80s new wave punk poppy kind of sound. That band have been away for a long time, and this was a really great return from them. And then also the return of Katie J. Pearson and her third studio album, Someday Now. Her music's brilliant. I've loved everything she's ever put out, EPs, other two albums. And yeah, I was always going to buy this one off the back of the first two records, and I really enjoyed this one as well. Okay, so October probably felt like the busiest month of new release for me, and also for my wallet, really. So I'd start with a favourite, and I doubt I'll probably get slated for this, and I doubt it'll be a favourite for many others, but Coldplay's Mew Music. It seems like it's a cool thing to hate Coldplay these days, and what it's a controversial kind of opinion that they should be loved, but honestly, this record is absolutely incredible. They've always divided opinion, and I've always had a soft spot for the band from pretty much everything they've put out. But the new music is so incredible. It's a follow up to the previous record, Music of the Spheres. It's a 10th studio album, and I remember watching some interviews when they put out the record. I think one was with Zane Lowe, and they talked about how the record was a kind of collaboration with the ninth record, Music of the Spheres. It kind of worked in partnership with that. So I did a little bit of reading up on it. It was recorded in Spain. They spent a couple of weeks recording tracks for this before kind of getting back into other studios later on. It's without undoubtedly a pop record, but there's so many other influences to this record as well, including funk, electronic, even some Afro beats in there on a couple of the tracks. I think I read an interview that Chris Martin said that Mew Music was kind of a story of waking up in the morning and feeling terrible about yourself, and feeling terrible about the world and distressed and isolated. But then the album takes you on a journey to feel the total opposite by the end of it, and when you go to bed. So lead single Feels Like I'm Falling in Love was released in the months leading up to the record's release, and it received really good reviews. I remember seeing them play that at Glastonbury. And musically, I think they're at the peak right now in terms of like commercially, probably more than anything. Obviously, the early records that they put out, like Parachutes and the second record, I've forgotten the name of it now. That was, they were raw back then, but this one, it kind of just shows how strong they've become, and the live kind of sound is so great as well. So okay, moving on to the next one in October, and that's The Smile and Cutouts. I said in the previous episode of this series that it'd been a busy year for The Smile, and they've released two records this year. The second one being called Cutouts on XL Records. It was recorded at Abbey Road, and they're based in Oxfordshire as well. And Obviously, we know the Smiles, Tom York and Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, and Tom Skinner from Songs of Kemet. And I think they've had these songs around for a while now. Some of them have been played in 2021 and 2022 live. But this has been the closest kind of sound that the Smile have had to Radiohead so far in their career. Lyrically, the record addresses themes such as capitalism, climate change, and I read that the album's title refers to an espionage term that Tom York discovered whilst reading about Russian interference in Western politics. It blows my mind. Some of the stuff that he comes out with. He's ridiculously smart guy. But of the two records, I think that they've put out this year, Cutouts is probably my favorite of the two. It's a bit more accessible than the other one from earlier in the year. There's a lot of heavy synth on this record, and some high kind of tempo, more anthemic kind of stuff, which we know Radiohead are quite good at. But they've still got that jangly kind of Radiohead guitar stuff that comes through. And again, that's kind of Tom and Johnny kind of playing off each other really well. So, but I think this is probably been the best record they've put out for me ever. It was ran close by the debut. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, such a great record and a really good one for 2024. Okay, so the next record, I will say this might be my record of the year. So a bit of a spoiler alert there. Laura Marling, Patterns in Repeat. Just wow. Every year she comes back with such an incredible record, and I don't know how she does it. She's been away for 4 years, and Patterns in Repeat has been put out this year, and it's such a beautiful record. It's documented her journey into motherhood, which she's talked about in numerous interviews. And it was sort of conceived in 2023, as I said, after the birth of her daughter. And obviously, when you read the song titles and things like that on it, it kind of reflects that. It reflects motherhood. It reflects the aging process. It reflects, one thing she said was it reflects how patterns are passed down through the family over generations. So I thought that was a really nice touch. It was recorded at Laura's home and also Bert Jansch's studio in London, which is really cool. And it opens with a sound of Laura Marling and her partner talking about something with her daughter's voice being heard, and that kind of sets the scene for the record and the themes. So she's put out 3 singles from this record so far, which is Patterns, No One's Gonna Love You Like I Can, which I absolutely love, and Child of Mine. They're all incredible songs. I'd probably say they're all probably 3 of the favorite songs from the record as well for me. So again, I said I can't talk up this album enough. It's an amazing record. Laura's voice is absolutely beautiful. It's so soothing and relaxing, but that's just nothing new for fans. This is a typical Laura Marling record. Dreamy tracks, dreamy lyrics. Her voice is amazing. Her vocals are so strong, and it's a really special record. As I said, record of the year, quite possibly. We'll see. Let's move on. So the last record I want to talk about is from a band that probably not a lot of people will know, and that's Danny and the Champions of the World, and the album's called You Are Not a Stranger Here. This is, again, one of my favourite records that's come out this year. Comes from the Americana kind of background. Again, I think in the first half of the year review, a band called Brown Horse are quite similar. They've got quite similar sound. But, Danny and the Champions of the World have put out another great record. It's a 7th studio album by Danny Wilson and his band, and it really is so strong. I think instantly from the opening track, you get how personal this record has been to create for Danny and how much of his kind of heart and blood and soul has been put into the writing of these songs. And, he's put this record together so beautifully. It's intricate at times, it's intense at times, but it's so well crafted. Danny's such a remarkable storyteller, and he reminds me of a sort of 70s era Springsteen, like the Nebraska era of Springsteen. And he creates, and Darkness on the Edge of Town as well. And he creates characters so well to tell stories so well in his songs. The track Kicking Tires is beautiful, as is Future Past and Robot Cries. They're really, really strong on this record. And again, it's such an amazing album. I've said this all the way through these couple of episodes. This year's been so incredible for music again. And I don't really know how people are picking their favorite albums because there's been so many, but yeah, let's see what people pick and put on their list. But so rounding up October, as I said, it was a busy month for releases, and just a few others that I've loved. Leon Bridges and his soulful album Leon, that's a great one. He's come back with another strong soul record. again, really good. Paul Heaton, he returned again with his, classic kind of singer-songwriter album that's called The Mighty Several. Again, another strong release from Paul. Cortinas, they've released Pink Cactus Cafe. Again, another solid record. Probably not one of my favorites from their kind of catalog, but yeah, again, it's very strong. And then finally, I've got to give a shout out to a friend's band, Nova Blood. They were on the podcast a few weeks back, and their electronic album, Destroying the Magic, again, a really great one to check out if you're into electronic music. So that's worth checking out. Okay, so into November then, considerably quieter than October, but it was definitely quality over quantity. And I think everybody has had this band on the tip of the tongue for the last few months, and that's The Cure. They came back after 16 years, is it, I think, since they've put out a record and an album called Songs of the Lost World. It's I think this will be probably a lot of people's record of the year. Again, it's such a strong record. It's their fourth studio album, and you instantly get transported back to the disintegration era of The Cure. It's been a long time since they've been making this record. I think that's been kind of put out in interviews, and Robert Smith's mentioned that quite a lot of time. And I think it was first originally muted to come out in 2019, but then it's come 5 years later. Whether that was to do with the pandemic or they just weren't happy with the songs, but yeah, it's such a well-crafted record. It's the first one to feature guitarist Reeves Gabriel as well. Again, as I said, it's very much a disintegration kind of a record. So it's dark, it's atmospheric, it's dirgy. It's that kind of Cure sound, that guitar, that waning kind of guitar sound that they always put out. But that's my favorite record. My favorite song on this record, sorry, is the second track, "And Nothing Is Forever." It's beautiful. It's so mesmerizing. I've listened to that so many times. Again, I won't go into this record too much because I think everybody will have talked it to death a little bit, but there's not enough superlatives to describe how good this record is. It's majestic and it's got such a strong kind of spine to it. It's up there with the band's greatest work, I think. And, I think again, as I said, my mini review won't do it justice, but it's such an amazing record. The next record from November was Primal Scream's Come Ahead. Finally, they've come back with a new record. And again, this is like a great funk and soul kind of disco inspired record. It's almost like they've tried to replicate a little bit of the 1994 record, Give Out But Don't Give Up. But yeah, it's such a great kind of that funky kind of Primal Scream, dancey kind of sound. But then when you listen to it quite carefully, it's got so many different kind of instruments on it. It's got flutes, it's got horns, it's got maracas. Bobby Gillespie's vocals are kind of groovy like, and it's great. It makes you want to get up and dance. And there's some excellent guitar playing from Andrew Innes as always. Produced by David Holmes, who the last Primal Scream album he produced was in 2000. That was the Exterminator record, which I absolutely loved. And you can kind of tell once you find that out, his fingerprints have been on this, and it's got that usual electronic touches as well from what we used to Primal Scream putting out. I think I read somewhere before that Bobby Gillespie wasn't really sure if he was going to put out another Primal Scream album since sort of 2016's Chaosmos has kind of bombed a little bit, but I'm so glad they put this one out. And yeah, it was a really strong return from the sort of Scottish band, and yeah, I'm glad they've put that out. So the last record I want to talk about in November is that came out at the end of November, and I've had a couple of weeks with this one. This is Michael Kiwanuka with Small Changes. It's a great listen. It's his usual kind of sound, but it's a little bit of a slow burner, this one, I think. And I've heard a few people say that. But again, his vocals are so amazing. I had to stick this one in here and talk about it. It's got that usual soul sound, and it's really strong. I think, again, he's got a great singer-songwriter soul voice, and he just knows what he's doing. It's such a really, really good strong soul singer, and yeah, I think hopefully can try and catch him live next year if I can. Okay, then, so December, like I say, we're only a few days into December, but looking at the list of stuff, there isn't really anything that's muted to come out that I really am looking forward to. So what I thought I'd do here is I'd kind of pick up a few records that I missed also earlier in the year that I forgot to add in from the first half of the year. So just a few honourable mentions here. Band called New Dad, Madra, a really great record. Kind of shoegazy a little bit. Same as the next band, Whitelands, their album Nightbound Eyes Are Blind to the Day. Saw these support Slow Dive back in February, and they were absolutely amazing. Again, yeah, I would be picking up that record if you like the kind of shoegazy, kind of slow divey sound. Also sound a little bit like Ride. John Bramwell, he came back this year with a solo album called The Light Fantastic. Again, another brilliant record. And also a band called The K's, which I know probably a few people will like. Their album, I Wonder If the World Knows, that's their debut record. And yeah, that's very much of the indie kind of rock kind of focus in effect. And then finally, Ian Skelly's Lotus and the Butterfly, the drummer from the Coral, he always puts out some great stuff. So yeah, so that's kind of the year really in music. That's 2024 rounded up. Again, as I've said a couple of times during this episode and the last episode, it's been an absolutely amazing year for records. These are just my favorites that have been released. You know, every year it gets more and more difficult to pick favorite records. So many incredible artists out there. You know, keep supporting them, buying records, going to see them play live, and they keep repaying us with music. You know, that's how they make their money. You know, I don't want to push that too hard on everybody, but you know, if you can buy some physical music from any artist, they'll repay us with some great stuff. So yeah, so thanks for tuning into this episode of the Record Collectors Club Conversations podcast. This is, as I said, part of the year in review series. We've got a couple more episodes coming up in the next few weeks with some roundtable kind of friends of mine, and we talk about our real favorite records and other stuff. So yeah, thanks for joining us, and I'll catch up soon.